Need a new idea. Need a new... Huh? An email? Is this a video?
Hey Mason, it's Mike from Flashing Badger Painting. I have a challenge for you. In this box is a surprise. I'm not going to tell you what's in here, but they are painted models. Your challenge from me is to come up with a diorama and to show everyone your amazing creative process. It's about to travel the globe and make its way to you.
What do you mean
Best of
travel?
luck.
Huh? How do you know where I live? Emmy-winning performances aside, as you just saw from Mike, he just sent me over some minis that I could use to make a diorama. He's an absolutely amazing mini painter, and everyone should go check him out. I didn't feel like doing some voiceover after the fact, so I'll cut back to my genuine reactions when I first opened this box. Some of it is cut out because the whole unboxing took about 10 minutes, so without further ado, here we go. What did he do? Open me last, have fun, dude. Let's try. Okay. Some orcs. Oh my gosh. I think they're called orcs. Again, I'm not a warhammer guy. Oh my god, that guy's got a huge ass gun. That's sick. Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool. Dude, I'm blown away, dude. This was like this. I don't know if he means this one or it's just both. Oh. Oh. Oh, that's so cool. Oh my god. Alright, I'm gonna go spend a couple hours just staring at these things, and I'll figure something out, and then we'll see where we can go from there.
3 hours later.
While looking for some inspiration, I found this really cool destroyed Rhino on Thingiverse and printed one out. To complement the wrecked, burnt out nature of the Rhino, I went with a rusty base coat. For this, I just used some whole red and yellow. To add a little bit more variation, I just added some more yellow to the mixture. And once it was dry, I applied a thick coat of Vallejo chipping fluid. I then mixed a red color similar enough to the Blood Angel, using some German gray and red. I really wasn't caring too much about getting full coverage, and really kind of let that base layer show through because I was going to be chipping it anyways. Then it was on to the chipping. I find the best kind of brushes to be using for this are the older brushes that just no longer can maintain a point, or some of your more stiff brushes that just have gunk in them. After chipping, I realized the contrast wasn't as much as I would like it to be, so I went back with a more orangey, rusty color on those rusty spots. The model had these little damage marks, so I wanted to emphasize them using a little bit of flat black, just as some kind of like burnt scorch marks. I then followed this up with a dark brown oil wash, maybe more of a pin wash to be exact, didn't really slather the whole thing with it, but mainly focusing it on all those raised little details. Following this up, I felt the scorch marks needed a little bit more than just the flat black, so I went at it with a pretty translucent flat white, just on the upper portions of the scorch marks. And then to bring it back down and tie it back together, I used the oil wash over it as well. At this point it was pretty close to being finished, but I still wanted to push the contrast between the rust and the paint further, so I made a lighter version of that red base color, and then just stippled it in some small little areas just to help pop it even more. After finding the Rhino, I had also stumbled upon these Sectum Imperial walls. I hit it with a quick black and white Zenithal Prime. I then hit it with an off-white cream color, again just stippling this towards the upper areas and more exposed parts, Just doing this to add a little bit of texture, especially when we spray over it with another color later. To add even more texture and break it up a little bit further, I sprayed a reddish brown color, just focusing these around these little raised bits. I'm pretty much following Vince Ventrella's painting guide on how to do these Imperial ruins, as I feel he really captures the look I'm going for. I normally like using Tamiya deck tan for some concrete colors, but I am all out of that, so I whipped up a concrete color using these 3 colors, and then sprayed the walls with it. Not really caring if I get too much overspray over those previous steps. Those steps are really just there to help break up the texture and kind of show some light spots underneath it anyways. I then mixed up a lighter gray color and sprayed that around the top portions of the walls. With the airbrush out of the way, it was time to do the tedious stuff. In this case, painting all of the metal frames. This took by far the longest amount of time, but it's necessary. The color in this case is just Vallejo steel. I did add a little bit of dark gray to it just to darken it up even further. And then we're left with something that's far too clean. So I got the oils out to do an oil wash. I made a relatively thick wash using burnt umber, and then I just went to town slathering it everywhere. You really can go as heavy or as light as you want on this step, and we'll actually be toning this down in just a little bit. Once it was dried at the touch, then I began to tone it down. To do so, I used a sponge or foam material that I had dipped in some mineral spirits, and then I just began to wipe from the top down. This just starts cleaning it up so you can start seeing some of that base color again, and you get some lovely streaks. The best part about it is the sponge also can't get into those hard to reach places, which is perfectly fine. This is a building that's been sitting outside. It's going to start collecting a whole bunch of dirt and grime. Speaking of being outside, having all of that steel means there's going to be some rust. For this, I just used 2 colors, both from Vallejo, one of a darker brown and one of an orangey color, and I went back and forth using a brush and a sponge just to dab here and there, trying to keep it as random as possible, but then ultimately failing in some spots. I followed this up with going back to that lighter gray color that I used on the walls and just caught some of the edges as kind of like an edge highlight. Finishing those highlights, I wanted some more grime, so I went back to that brown wash. I finished off the rust with another wash of AK's light rust. All that was left to do was make up a muddyish, greenish, grimy looking color, and then spray it towards the bottom of the building to help show that it's been, again, outside. We now have the set pieces and we have the figures. All we need is the base. And here's where we kind of go off into left field. I know very little about Warhammer. Most of the stuff I've ever seen are hive cities, these big, gigantic buildings, and I wanted to go and do something a little bit different. I stumbled upon a post on Reddit not too long ago of some Imperial ruins that looked like they were overran and overgrown, and I thought that that was really interesting, and I hadn't seen a lot of that before in my very little experience with Warhammer. I was looking up these orcs, which I think are called beast snagaboys, and to me it makes more sense for them to be living in more of the open area where they can go hunt their game, i.e. big metal machines. So I wanted to incorporate both those ideas by having the overgrown ruins and a open field. I apply the ground texture the same exact way I've done in almost every one of my videos, just this time I made sure to define the shapes of the craters that were going to be in the middle of this field. With that drying, I then went on to painting the rock face. For this, I just used the Terrain Tutor's acrylic wet washing technique. I applied water to the rock surface, and then used a medium gray wash as the base color. I then followed this up with some earth colors, in this case sienna, and I applied them directly onto the surface, in random little spots here and there. I then used a different brush that was dipped in water and then just dabbed and blended them into the surface. It really becomes this back and forth process where you add more and more earthy colors and then dilute them and blend them into the surface, going back and forth, getting that kind of coverage that you're looking for, just really trying to break up that natural base color. And then you can follow up some of those earthier colors with a darker black, or just add black to some of those earthy colors and focus those more in the cracks, in the recesses, in the spots where shadows would naturally collect. And then just eventually, after going back and forth multiple times, and then eventually settling on a look that you're going for. With the rock now out of the way, I went to prepping for the dirt texture. For this, I just used some burnt umber and I applied it all over the ground texture, but any dark, earthy color will do. With the paint still wet, I then applied some watered down Mod Podge and spread it across the surface. Then I applied the dirt texture. For this, it's literally just sifted dirt from my backyard, put into an old paint can with a stocking over it, and then sprinkled over the top. Following this up, I glued the Rhino in place and used some Vallejo thick mud as a way of blending it into the surface. It's completely the wrong color, but we're going to paint it anyways. I just need it to fill up those gaps and then again just blend it in. Once it was dry, I loaded up the airbrush with a similar brownish color that I sprayed on the walls, and then sprayed the entirety of the ground texture just to help blend everything together. I then came back at it with an even lighter brown color just to help break up the monotony of the surface and just give it a little extra texture. Next up was static grass. So for this, I made my own tufts. These are 7mm light green from Woodland Scenics. It's as easy as dolloping a little bit of glue on some parchment paper and sprinkling it over. By far the best method to do it. With the tufts almost completely dry, I then applied them to the surface, just placing them in random spots here and there. And since I didn't let the glue completely dry, they kind of glued themselves to the surface, which was perfect. I somehow lost the footage of me applying the next step, which was the 4mm grass. I only got the last part of it, so here it is. But all I did was apply some glue in between those big tufts that we had just applied and shaked on some 4mm grass just in between them all. Not gonna lie, seeing glimpses of me with my hood up, shaking this weird looking instrument over this diorama, kinda looks a little bit like a creepy looking ritual. It's not, I swear. I followed this up with a little bit of 2mm grass in some spots here and there. Going for that more patchy, open, trample look to it. Then it was time to glue the walls in place. For this, I used some of the fastest drying glue I know, which is PVA glue, of course. Then I followed this up with some more tufts. These are some tufts I've actually been holding on to for a very long time and never really had a use for them until now. I followed this up with some more of that Vallejo thick mud, and I wanted to address the bottom of the craters. I wanted the mud to be a little bit thicker, so I added some plaster of Paris to it and mixed it in. I then just stippled this onto the bottom of the craters just to get that kind of texture that I was looking for. Don't use your good brushes for this. This will absolutely destroy them, and it's a nightmare to clean them, so use a dedicated brush for this. While that was drying, I wanted to address the little patches of grass. I wanted to make everything a little bit lighter, so I went at it with some Tamiya buff. Now that the craters are dry, I went at it with some earth colors from MIG. This is just an enamel paint, but much like when I was painting the rocks, this is very much a back and forth process. I painted everything with the enamel paint, and then I adjusted it by adding another textured paste, this time from AKA Interactive. Wanting to add a little bit more details to the crater, I took some old roots from some weeds that were growing in my backyard, and I plicked off some of the roots and glued them to the edge of the crater. I was applying the roots while that AK texture paste was still wet, so I used a brush to help push in the roots to embed them a little bit into the surface and help add a little bit of color to help blend them in a little bit. I then took a small section of jute twine, separated the three pieces into the smaller pieces, and then glued one end of that together. And then just used some cheap hairspray to spray on the ends so I could sprinkle on some Woodland Scenics fine turf. Using a pair of tweezers, I just pulled and prodded some of the strands apart to get the kind of size I was looking for and applied it to the edge of the building. I made a whole bunch of these and just hung them all over the building. Realizing it looked a little too empty without some rubble, I took some concrete slabs from some of my previous projects that I had made and just cut them up using a pair of scissors. Don't throw away the crumbs come in pretty useful, mainly focusing on trying to make bigger chunks of concrete. Once I was happy with the larger pieces, I took those crumbs and then I sprinkled those about in between various rubble piles. I just sprayed it with some isopropyl alcohol and dropped on some watered down Mod Podge to glue it all in place. But now that rubble is far too clean, so I weathered it down using some MIG earth. Yes, the color is called earth, and then I just blended it with some more mineral spirits. Wanting to increase the fauna more, I took some dried moss sheets and I separated and pulled and prodded until I got these little plant-like looking things, and then just glued them all about, mainly focusing at the base of the walls / building. I then used even larger chunks and glued them on top of the walls to kind of hide these ugly looking marks. I made another batch of bushes that I've used previously on the channel and glued those all over the place. I then placed the figures, gave it a coat of black paint, and this one was done. First off, I want to give an absolutely massive shout out to Mike from Flashing Badger Painting. He is an absolute legend for sending over these minis so I can make a cool diorama with them. So please, especially if you want to see how those minis were painted, because I really didn't show them too up close, I really wanted you to have to go to his channel to see them. Links to his channel are in the description and they're the pinned comment of this video. We're trying to launch both our videos at the same exact time, so if you're seeing this, hopefully his video is up right now, so go on over there. I'll see you there. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you made it this far, you guys are truly next level, and I'll catch you in the next one.